2025 was a big year for RuneScape, and I want to take a look at all the updates that went out throughout the entire year to kind of get an idea of how big of a year it was. I'm going to go through every single update throughout the years and kind of skip over the ones that were a little minor, but talk about all the ones that were big, as well as include some of the community insight that I kind of had while I was making content for it. It's my very first year covering a whole year of RuneScape as well, and I just wanted to share that with you. This is a great video just to throw in the background, do it while you're cooking, walking, taking care of your dog, whatever. Thank you so much for stopping by. I appreciate you watching the video. Be sure to subscribe, like, comment what your best update of the year was and what you're hoping to see in 2026. Thank you guys for a great year, and let's have another one. Right, buddy? Yeah. All right, enjoy the video. And I want to talk about how RuneScape was in 2025. I think it was a pretty pivotal year. It started off kind of rocky, and then slowly got a little better as the year went on, and it ended up being, I think, it's one of the most memorable years in, I guess, like the RuneScape community, in like the RuneScape franchise in a long time. There's a lot of things that happened this year. I kind of want to talk about a few of the updates that went on and just kind of give my thoughts on what 2026 is looking like, because there's a lot of things that are going on. I'm kind of looking forward to this year. So we're going to start first in January. So in January, we had a couple updates. Wasn't too many. It was first the announcement of like Golden Gnome stuff. The biggest thing in January, though, I think they were still going through the backlash of the membership survey. So the membership survey was a huge thing of like, are they going to put ads in the game? How are they going to segment like membership and change the monetization for the game? It was a huge deal. And I think that was a really big point where I think a few people were getting ready to quit the game too. I knew after that there was a good chunk of people that ended up stopping playing. I think some named people for RuneScape were what's his name, Kritia, who was doing he was doing a series on a PVM series, and then in addition to that we had Rayo, who stepped away because of that as well. He felt like taking away, and then later on you find out that he had a newborn baby, and he's also just busy with life, so he just kind of stepped away from making content in general. But there was a lot of people that got really flustered about how that whole thing went on. So there was a whole fiasco and all thing about that. It was a big deal. And the update from Mod Pips at the time, who was the CEO, and he ended up giving like a pretty empty response to the whole membership thing. It was very tone deaf, very PR orchestrated. So it wasn't going pretty good. And then later in that month, we had the announcement of Combat Mastery achievements, which was actually a pretty big deal. Combat Masteries were a really big anticipated update that people were looking forward to getting, because it was doing very good in Old School, which is the other game that has Combat Mastery achievements in there. And that it was something I was looking forward to as well. And it's a pretty big update. There wasn't a huge amount of stuff coming in. We only saw a few bits and pieces of upcoming 110 updates that were coming up through the year. And those were going okay. So the month of January wasn't nothing crazy. Outside of that, we also had the announcement of like Golden Gnome finalists, and that was just more so the overall spectrum. But in the looming of that, going into February was a DXP month, as well as the Combat Mastery achievements coming into the game. Now, I think one of the things that was more important than the Combat Masteries coming into the game was actually the how to share your player interfaces. Sharing your player interface in the game was a very big update in my opinion, because it was a great way for people to be able to just steal interfaces from their buddies or from anybody that allowed sharing an interface. And that was really good for getting new players in the game, getting your friends in the game, because they could just type your name into the settings, you could take their interface from them, and it was a really good way for people to just kind of like get integrated into the game without having to do the worry and shuffle of going through the interfaces. Those were the two big notable updates in February, but not gonna lie, February wasn't that terrible of a month. It had DXP, Combat Masteries, and the interfaces, so it was okay. Wasn't anything a big staple, but was a decent month. You definitely had still a little bit of a backlash in the community still going on about the membership thing, especially on the Old School side of the house. But for a lot of people here on RuneScape 3, it wasn't anything that was truly deterring in my opinion. I don't fret about things until it's actually introduced. Until it's actually introduced to the game, I don't really worry, because I feel like a lot of that's fear mongering. I don't remember if the leaks for the membership survey was if it was a leak or if it was actually pushed out. so I don't really remember how that ended up being. But I wasn't tripping about the membership survey, and because it wasn't, and nothing in that was talked about in the survey was introduced into the game. If stuff was introduced in the game by the backlash and like revert it, that would have been a very different conversation we're having here. But thankfully, it wasn't too terrible in my opinion for that one. Now coming up in March was a little bit more of a crazy month. March had a little bit bigger of a amount of things going on. We had Runefest. Runefest was a very, 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 very fun time. I was actually able to go to Runefest this year, and it was fantastic. Well, last year now, and it was fantastic. It was a childhood dream of mine to be able to go, and it was very, very busy. It sold out and instantly online. They had to get a bigger venue and everything like that. It was a very big deal, and it was very, very fun. My big problem with Runefest, though, when it came to RuneScape 3 in general, was more so the problem that I had with it was that they introduced the way that they did the RuneScape, the old school RuneScape was in the main room, and then the way they did RuneScape 3's panels for like the updates and like the combat stuff and like giving people a chance to talk to people that made the game, that was like in a whole separate room on a different floor, and there was no sign telling you where you had to go. It was completely alienated from the rest of the convention, and it really felt that way. It was upsetting because not only did I still paid a full price ticket for me to enjoy and get into this task, get into this event, but now I'm being treated like a second class, participant to an event that I paid full money to. That was the only gripe that I had about that, and that was very, very upsetting. And a lot of the other people that I met that were there as well felt the same exact way. It was a pretty upsetting thing to go through. And if I had paid the full price ticket to fly from all the way from the United States to come to Birmingham, England, and sit at the convention and had to do with that, I would have been pretty upset. But overall, Runefest was a lot of fun. It was a ton of fun. And then rest of March, Runefest was very fantastic. We got a lot of things updated and teased about it. We had the Masket teased. We had Haven Hive being teased, as well as a new skill coming in this year in 2026. That was very, very exciting. I think that was a very nice way for me, way for people to look forward to things. That's definitely stuff that I am very excited for this year coming up as well. I think that's going to be pretty nice to see what comes up in that year, and it definitely built a little bit of hype on that. They haven't really delivered more hype on the Haven Hive stuff, more than I would like in retrospect. They've talked about it in a few live streams. They've talked about it very little, but they haven't really mentioned it outside of like a couple live streams after the announcement at RuneFest back in March. And then next thing, there was a brand new CEO announced as well, which is Mod North, who is our new CEO currently for the company, who oversees all of Jagex, also Old School RuneScape, and RuneScape Dragon Wilds. He's been a pretty pivotal thing. A lot of people were on the fences to see how a new CEO would end up running the company, because Jagex is pretty infamous for having a rather brutal, I guess, monetization system and practice when it comes to this game. And we were pleasantly surprised to hear how Mod North was going to approach things. And I always approach things with, like, I don't really praise anybody or give any harsh criticisms on people until I see overall performance on them, and then we'll wait till the end of the year to provide that on my thoughts. And I'm going to tell you the thoughts of that as we get through this more. And then in the rest of March, we had a few things showing up. We started getting more of these blog posts called right-click examines, which were essentially these little blog posts that give you an idea of what of an upcoming update was going to be. I personally was a really big fan of this thing, and this is going to be a common theme for this year. I think this year was a really great year for overall communication. There's a lot of times when playing RuneScape, or at least just like, it's hard to find news of like what's going on in this game. Compared to like other video games that I follow, like Diablo 3, Diablo 3, 4, I could get patch notes on it easily. Call of Duty, I can get patch notes on it easily. League of Legends, I can get patch notes on it easily. When it comes to other MMOs, it was kind of hard to get patch notes on Final Fantasy or like Guild Wars 2 or anything like that, like those other games. But I've known what other regularly communicated patch notes system looks like, and I didn't see that for RuneScape, except this year. I think this year they did a really good job of communicating thought processes for why we're going to make this update, why we're going to make these changes, why we're not going to implement these changes, and stuff like that. So I really enjoyed how they ended up doing it this year with the overall communications, and right-click examines were a great example of that going forward. And then, of course, later on in March, they also announced Dragon Wilds, which is a brand new IP for RuneScape, so that was kind of exciting in itself. Pretty decent game. I liked it. It's still in early access. It got a big update not too long ago. It is a pretty good game. I'm not going to talk about it too much more in this one. Going into April, we had a couple quest updates coming into this one. We had the Return to the Desert, the Pharaoh's Folly. That quest was okay. Not too bad. That one came out on April 7th. I liked the desert quest line a little bit. Not my favorite quest line. Not until the end. Not until we get to the Amaska one. The rest of it was decent. So they ended up getting a brand new player update, player survey that was introduced, and this player survey talked about 110 skills and the Desert Story expansion, Haven Hunt exploration, and introducing new game modes to the game. It was actually pretty big support for players that liked increasing skilling caps to 120 and up to 110, as opposed to 20%. Now, this is mostly because a lot of people didn't like how the 110s were like pretty much a reskin of each other, and there was the same mechanics over and over. I didn't mind the updates. I thought they were decent gameplay loops, because once they go from because it's only from 1 to 100 to 110. When you finally get the remaining gap of 110 to 120, that loop should be different, and that should be changed. Because now, if it went from 99 to 120, it was all the same loop, that would be kind of lame. But I'm hoping that they expand it more past that. They did a really good job of 120 thieving, which we'll talk about later as we get to the update in a year. But I thought it was pretty decent. The Desert Storyline expansion was something people really wanted, apparently. I'm not really sure people wanted to go to Desert, but that was something the players voted on. And then the Haven Hunt exploration was a very, very big thing, because people really want a brand new area in the game. And then introducing new game modes, which we'll find out later was going to be the introduction of RuneScape 3 Leagues. These are all very big things that came from a survey that was added earlier in the year. And these are all results that we found out getting from surveys. This was actually a pretty big pain point, because there are a lot of people that were like, well, we do a lot of surveys for this video game that we don't really get a bunch of responses on. So I'm glad that they added actually provided context as to what this survey was for, and I'm glad that they started doing that. And then we had the Blooming Burrow return, which is a seasonal update. Around this time was the same exact time we had a weird political thing going on in the community. We had a few people commenting on I guess it was a very politically charged moment during this time for some reason with the Blooming Barrel. It was definitely one of the seasonal events that I don't really care for them all that much. I definitely could understand why people are like not happy with them, because they're not very fun and very engaging to get into, and I can understand that sentiment. But people were getting upset about it, and apparently that was just like a huge thing. So that was going on in the background of them releasing a seasonal update. This also brought in one of the greatest looking cosmetics in the game, the carrot outfit. Yep. And then later this month was also Game Jam. Game Jam is one of the things that births a bunch of range of updates. So April, but doesn't really produce those updates inside of that same month, and you usually see it later down the road. So overall, April was kind of like a meh month. So it was what it was. Next, coming into May, we had a game jam farming strike, which is a little bit of quality of life for farming. We had the augmented rune crafting and thieving. This introduced new offhands for thieving and rune crafting, which were pretty decent. I'm not really sure how much those things were used and done, so I was kind of upset to see that it wasn't necessarily the greatest pieces of update I want to see, but I was a little bit bummed about that in general, because like the only thing I ever ended up using from that was the mushy bag, but wasn't that great of a change in my opinion. Next, we added in the masterwork and legendary weapon improvements. Now this was a huge update. Now, mastery and legendary weapons being introduced in the game is more of a definitive tier of kind of simplifying of what weapons are in this video game. So a legendary weapon is a weapon that has a special attack and a passive effect. Think of your fractured staff Armadillo that has a special attack of increasing critical strike, your critical strikes launch and additional ability damage, and then they also have a passive effect of having added critical strike damage. Now the master weapons all have the same passive, or any weapon that just has a passive that provides a effect. All the masterwork weapons all have the effect of healing you 2% of the damage you deal and stuff like that. So that introduced those kind of identities, and as well was the rework for the Exekill, which was a very needed rework, but ended up not hitting necessarily the same notes I think everybody wanted. I don't remember. Is this the one? Yeah. It was the change from Execute doing a bunch of like bleed damage to then hitting like an absolute truck. This is one of the greatest things ever introduced in the game. I loved it, giving Melee a nice hard-hitting identity again, and I really enjoyed that type of update. I think that was something that was very good to see. And then this was also the month of nerfs. The biggest nerfs and the longest blog post in Jagex history came with this update. This was absolutely insane. I will never forget reading this entire freaking Bible of an update, dude. This was atrocious how long this update, dude, was. It was insane. It was just disgusting. It nerfed so many things in the video game, and I will not lie, it's for a better good, because we were bringing in so much gold and depleting so many things in this game. I definitely understand it, but it was a painful time for the player base to end up going through all these changes. Overall, what ended up happening, we're making these gigantic nerfs so that we can take care of the health of the game long term. And you've kind of noticed some of those long-term effects now. Some items have already begun to go back up. Some items have definitely gone down. Like, for example, they changed the drop rate of Greater Ricochet, which is a spell that increases your critical your attacks of Greco, which is a very prominent attack. It's a very prominent ability to be used, and it's now not necessarily one moment. It drops twice as often or something like that. And so it drops twice as often and now ends up it's just more common. So the price has gone down for that codex. But because it drops twice as often, it's supposed to balance out, but you're still at the mercy of RNG. For a great example, they increased the drop rate of scales at Warcraft. I have done 400 extra kills at Warcraft since the post buff and haven't gotten a scale since the buff. So I haven't made any more money, and the money is less than I'm getting now because the more people are farming it, and there's less things that I'm getting. So it's a double-edged sword. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse. It's just one of those things. It's just one of those things, unfortunately. But there's a lot of changes to come in that with the game health update. I think overall this was a good approach. And like, I wasn't too super upset about it as a prominent PVMer, because that is the audience that definitely got dismantled for doing for getting the PVM nerfs. It was a little bit frustrating, and I think a lot of people ended up taking breaks around this time because noticing that their moneymaker that was going on, notably Zamorak took the biggest hit with that because he was making so much money for those 2000% enraged kills, 500% enraged kills. You were bringing so much money from Zamorak, and it wasn't necessarily an easy boss to learn still, but a lot of people took a break because their cash cow was changed, or their cash cow was completely altered. And I will admit, it is a pretty rough thing to go through, especially when you had a pretty decent way for you to make money, and now that way is gone. So I definitely understand that, but I also understand the developer people are like, listen, we were going to absolutely dismantle this economy even more if we don't make those changes. So I think that was a pretty bold move in May, and we'll see how it ends up panning out for the rest of 2026. That was the biggest voice crack right at the end. What a beautiful clip. And it goes, it just completely just hiked. So June ended up being a pretty big month. June ended up getting the Star Bloom scenes were introduced to the game for the 110 crafting launch, the launch of 110 crafting, which introduced Masterwork robes, which I think are a fantastic addition to the game, and actually introduced the very first set of tier 100 robes, I think. It's tier 100 or tier 99 robes. And then the introduction of the hole at dungeoneering in the Lumbridge camp. That was fantastic. The return of Hole is a sacred time in Gielinor, as well as a little thing called the future of MTX and our approach and your improvement and your involvement. The updates and launches for June were pretty decent, I will say, and the biggest thing really was the approach for MTX. I think a lot of people were really interested to see how Jagex was actually going to start tackling the biggest head hurter that the game, definitely how MTX and how the video game is monetized, because like RuneScape is a fantastic game that is ruined by terrible PR. And one of the big PR problems is exactly that, like, hey, everybody in this game is pay to win, which obviously is not true. People have paid for convenience. People have paid to lamp some of their skills. I'm not gonna lie, like act like I haven't lamped some of my skills. Like obviously I use my lamp. It just happens, right? You just get over it. It's like one of those things. But it is a good game. There's a lot of video games that give you like little legs up to get through things, and it is what it is, and that's just how that goes. It doesn't necessarily make it a bad game. I think a bad game, in my opinion, becomes a monetization. If you can start paying for quest skips, that's when I would be leaving the game. But I definitely understand how like a lot of people don't want any kind of level monetization or advantages that come to the game, and so changing how MTX is introduced into the video game was a very big deal. And I'm very glad that they're introducing and reducing how MTX is going to be introduced to the game. And this was the very first introduction of that back in June. And this was actually a good time when people were starting to see actually a good sense of PR coming from the company, and as well from the brand new CEO. The new CEO, Mod North, was doing a good job, like saving face. He was talking to a lot of outlets. He was talking to a lot of people about RuneScape. They were talking about like the future of it and how he wanted to introduce and change a lot of things and make this game go for a longer time, which is really nice to hear, especially honestly, because MMOs are a very small corner of the internet, right? It's not necessarily like the most popular thing on the planet, but it is a small corner of the internet that needs to get talked about more, and he's definitely doing that more as CEO, and I appreciate it. I think it's good. I'll say my total thoughts for Mod North as we get again and wrap it up. But seeing the announcement of reducing MTX was fantastic, and that was the big point in June. The social response that online on Twitter and I guess across Reddit was there was a lot of happiness. People were very happy about it, but still skeptical because we hadn't seen anything concrete of what was going on. But fantastic news going forward. I forgot to mention also in June, the announcement of how they're going to approach MTX was the announcement of the experiment, which ended up being disabling Treasure Hunter, this DXP with only BXP items available, and the cosmetic mega drop of all the cosmetics inside of that were previously locked behind Treasure Hunter. These are all really big things that people were expecting to see, and these were experiments that were hopefully going to be starting soon, and we found out they were going to happening the next month, quickly in July. Rolling into July now, we have the very first experiment of disabling Treasure Hunter on July 22nd to July 28th. Now, playing through that 1 week of no Treasure Hunter on RuneScape was probably one of the most... It was a nice feeling logging into this video game and not getting, honestly, ads. Because you get a lot of ads when you pull into RuneScape, and it does kind of sour the experience, like right off the bat. I feel like I'm being sold something every single day that I'm awake. Every moment my eyelids flutter away from the sweet pupils of my eyes, I feel like I'm being sold something. If I had a sponsor, I would put the sponsorship right here, because that would be funny. All right. But when you log into a video game that is supposed to be relaxing for the most part, it is really jarring to get a double 450 key announcement. It is pretty upsetting to see, and I will not lie, I am not a fan of it. Yeah, and then also thinking about a lot of people when I talked to them, how they ended up feeling about Treasure Hunter being disabled at the same time. That was a very common theme, that they really liked not knowing, just knowing that you could not access this thing. This thing was no longer in the game, and it was just a beautiful feeling that everybody was just training everything they needed to the way it was supposed to be trained. And the world felt a little bit more alive. It felt a lot better that you didn't have an artificial way to level up your account. And I definitely understand that feeling. I will be looking forward to it deeply when it is an official thing going on in the section on June 19th, I believe is when it's supposed to be coming up. And it felt really good. It did feel healed, as wonderful Chris Benny has mentioned, and it is a fantastic feeling going forward. And I'm looking forward to that coming up in the new future. Additionally, in July, we saw the update of the cosmetic free worlds from July 28th to September 30th. Now, cosmetic free worlds were very interesting to see. Now, as you can see right now, I pretty much don't have any cosmetics on. Only cosmetic I have currently on my character right now is my master cape on the back, my seismic wand, and that's it. And my orb. Those are the only things I have. The rest of the things on me right now are the actual items I am wearing on my person. A lot of times when you look at RuneScape 3 characters, they do not have the actual items they're wearing. It is usually whatever someone has fantasized and felt like this is what makes me look like the prettiest girl in the yard. And to be very honest, I don't mind cosmetics in the video game, mostly because I think it provides people a level of expression, and it is a way to kind of change up. If you're wearing the same armor for 20 years, or you're wearing the same thing for a year, it gets boring really quickly. Cosmetics allow you a way to kind of just change up what you're doing and gives you a new feel. Additionally, if they're cosmetics that you earn through the gameplay, I'm a big fan of that, as it shows that you've either done something in the game, or you've achieved something in the game, or honestly, you just make a cool outfit. I think that level of customization is great, but a lot of cosmetics in the game have gone a little overboard and have become a little bit of an eyesore. And I definitely understand and empathize with people who do not like that thing in their medieval fantasy game. And a lot of them, cosmetics in the game over the years have slowly gone away from the mythic gothic feel that RuneScape naturally has in its atmosphere and its environments. So it can be very immersion breaking and very goofy, a little too goofy for a few things. And I definitely understand that level and how that can be disruptive overall, and they've changed that. They introduced the cosmetic free worlds as a test to see what people would want from that, and not gonna lie, they were very, 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 very empty. They were populated for about a week. They had a maximum of around like 700 people in one world at one time, but the problem was there was only 4 worlds, and those 4 worlds were very hard to PVM on because you had maybe about like 300 to 500 people on them at a time at peak time, and you couldn't really PVM because it has a problem with ping. You have a lot of lag, and those input lags when you're doing PVM in combat is very jarring and it's very unplayable. You only did a lot of skilling, and they introduced the weird thing of like everybody who's skilling looks the same because they're all in the same elite skilling outfits. They're all in the same thing doing the same stuff. And I was not gonna lie, I was the same way. I went to divination on that world. Everybody was in the same elder divination outfit. Some of them was in the artisanal divination outfit. Everybody was wearing the same thing. So that level of expression that I like seeing in people's outfits that are varied, it wasn't there for me, and it felt kind of lame. Not gonna lie. Only time I did like seeing though cosmetics was at War's Retreat. You would see a large number of people doing a large number of different things, doing different combat styles, but you saw a lot of necromantic users, brother. There was a lot of necros about, and they was doing necro activities, and you only saw a whole lot of necromancers, man. It was a lot of them, and it was honestly just But I do think that the overall idea for that was to introduce a cosmetic toggle. That way it isn't like you turn it off for everybody. You can just have the option of like, hey, turn them off for yourself, which I think was fantastic. I like having the option. I might use it sometimes too, because it is kind of neat to see what people are wearing, especially in like boss raids and stuff like that. But when it comes to just like your day-to-day activities, I don't care what you're doing, room. But a lot of people do care, and I'm glad that they introduced that as one of the extra experiments with that as well. We got more quest lines in the desert leading up to the big Eclipse of the Heart, which ended up being, I think that was the very last quest before a masket. I don't know if this one released a masket. This was also the release of a mascot. This was the release of a no. So Eclipse of the Heart also released in July, leading into August, which was going to be one of the biggest months of the year. July was the release of Eclipse of the Heart, was the finale, one of the best quests in the game, in my opinion. It was a fantastic quest added into the game and was a wonderful way. Was a fantastic way to finish up the series. I really enjoyed it. It was hitting one of RuneScape's strong points of like quests and stuff like that, and I really enjoyed how they ended up using the environment and just going through the overall storytelling. It was fantastic. August was probably the biggest month of the year for the people that finished the game. If you didn't finish the game, you were probably just watching it. Because this was the release of a mascot. A mascot was the largest and hardest boss fight in the game, and it was a ton of fun. It was a ginormous event that took place where RuneScape hosted a world's first race, and it was actually live streamed the entire time as well, which was a ton of fun. I really enjoyed how they ended up doing the mascot boss fight, and with this one, it was tremendous. It was difficult, and it came with a lot of enrages that came with the game. It was also the very first time they introduced a aura with the launch, where you ended up getting a limited time Tomb Beacon's Light aura from killing a mask at 2000% enrage in the first week of launch. That was a pretty big challenge, and I myself streamed it, and it was for me, that was one of the biggest stream weeks of my career. It was fantastic. I had a viewership of about 690 people that time. It's one of my longest watched VODs on YouTube. Fun fact, that VOD made me like $80 because it's a 10-hour VOD with I think like 5,000 views. It was crazy. So it was a very nice time. It was a very, very good time. It was a very fun time to be a part of RuneScape. It was very fun to watch. It was very fun to be involved. I networked with a lot of people to find teams and to get involved in the event. It was a fantastic time, and I was very happy to be playing RuneScape in August. And actually, the time building up to when that boss fight came out was actually very exciting as well. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed seeing people think about like what's going on. People were making discords, people were making teams, people were making jokes, yada yada yada. People talking smack, like I'm gonna get it before you, I'm gonna get it before this, I'm never gonna get it. Everybody was like, yeah. It was crazy. It was a really good time, and and honestly, I think everybody's having a great time with the release, and they did a really fantastic job with it. The Race to the World's First was a very well received Twitch live event from RuneScape itself, and they were featuring a ton of people, your boy included. That was fantastic, and it was just a really good time in general, just to be involved in the community and the space, and I loved it. It was probably one of my favorite times of the year, and a very one of my favorite times of playing this video game in general. I genuinely had a great time. Loved it very much. I am looking forward to the next big boss release that comes out to this scale. And I really do hope it is a group boss as well, because I think group PVM is one of the things that make an MMO shine, and I want to see more of that going forward. Additionally, in August, we saw the launch of Double XP with no MTX limitations. That was a fantastic little weekend because people had to actually train with the game. There was a lot of times when you're using MTX items on all double XP weekends, and people then have to actually invest into the economy and buy actual live items that people skilled or collected over time. And I think that was a really great way for people to make more money, and it felt more lively going to places and seeing people doing things instead of seeing everybody sitting inside a fort for Rent 3, just gaggling and jerking each other off inside a beautiful little fort. I think it's a much better way to see organically people training things in the organic spaces where they're meant to be trained, and I really like that. A great example was going to the crafting guild to work on 110 and 120 crafting and getting all of the crafting material and seeing people utilizing the guild to get things. I really enjoyed that, and I hope to see more of that going forward with updates. Additionally, in August, this was introducing leagues, which was going to be coming out in September. And now for September, we got the cosmetic mega drop experiment, which they flooded the shops with a bunch of cosmetic things. This was one of the updates I was very excited for myself because I wanted to pick up a lot of MTX items that I wasn't able to get through Treasure Hunter because I just like how they look, but I wasn't really in the fork and gamble my way through it. biggest disappointment with that though was that they were expressing it like it was going to put everything on the market for this store, but they ended up putting a very little amount. It wasn't nearly as many things as people were hoping for, and then they ended up changing the name to Cosmetic Drop on the store as opposed to Cosmetic Mega Drop. And that was a piece of feedback that they received, and they ended up changing it a lot as well. It was a really big deal, and I'm glad that they changed that and updated it. The reason why they didn't put a bunch of things on the store is because they were like, this is going to take too much time and effort to develop it into a store that nobody may not use. So they just wanted to test it with a few things before going into it all. And I can respect communication. Again, they had a lot of communication going into this, continuing throughout the year. And then on September 15th, we had leagues come out. Now, leagues were a really big deal. Leagues were a very popular game mode for the sister game of old school RuneScape, and it's a very popular time that people want to come out and check out the game. It's supposed to be RuneScape on crack, the most steroided version of the game in itself, and make it as overloaded and as strong as possible. You want to be able to hit the end game in one day and just be able to wipe out anything and everything in the wildest ways possible. That didn't happen in the very first leagues. It was almost impossible to get to the end of the game unless you unless you were a full-time creator for the game, or if you put an unhealthy amount of time, or if you were very rigid with your schedule and making sure you weaved in RuneScape for it. In my opinion, I thought leagues were a little bit of a letdown because they weren't nearly as fast, or the power fantasy was not as strong as it could have been. But for anybody who had never played RuneScape before, it was a really good time. They gave the game a shot, and it actually raised the average player count even several months after the launch week to go up an extra 12,000 players. We were averaging around 18 to 20,000 concurrent players in September. And then when leagues came out on September 16th or September 15th, ended up going up to 33 to 50,000 concurrent players playing leagues at the same time. It was a fantastic time. And I know a lot of people, myself personally, who met a bunch of people who've only played RuneScape for the very first time during leagues. It was fantastic. And after that league's hype, there was a lot of people that ended up stay playing, and we've had an average concurrent player count of 37,000 to about 33,000 after league launch, but I think it's fantastic. People just sticking around and playing the game and checking it out on the live servers as well. And that was several months after leagues. We had a lot of people covering the game as well. It was very, very fun. I really liked it. It was an exciting time. It was, now myself personally in September, it was kind of brutal. It was probably the worst month of me streaming ever, right after coming off the high of a masket, because we had a bunch of big dogs inside the Twitch category, and ain't nobody looking at the small dudes at the bottom of the category, even though we've been here the longest. It was kind of an upsetting thing. Not gonna lie, it was a really big demotivator, but it is what it is. If you're in any other category on this beautiful site on Twitch.tv, it is what it is, and that's how it happens, but that's just how it goes. But they ended up fizzling out, and we're still here. Additionally, in September, we got the Amaskit Combat Challenges. So the way they want to do combat challenges for new bosses going into the game is that after the new boss is introduced, the combat achievements will come a month or so after the release of that boss, so that the devs can get like an idea of like what kind of challenges they can make for players. And the problem that a lot of people were seeing with the release time of the Amaskit Combat Masteries was that it was in the middle of leagues, and there was a weird little like bitch fest of like, why are we dropping an update in the middle of leagues? And I was like, there's a lot of people that aren't necessarily playing leagues actually. So I think dropping an update in the middle of leagues is not that big of a deal. But there was just like an ungodly amount of like, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? And I just ended up being an update, and it ended up happening. Everybody that needed to get their Amaskit achievements ended up getting them anyways. And so it was just kind of weird. But they ended up dropping the Amaskit Combat achievements, which are a ton of fun to do. And I've really enjoyed going through a few of them. I still have a lot of them to knock out, but they are very fun, and they are actually quite challenging. Rolling in October was the vote for ending Treasure Hunter. This was the main update of the month, alongside the October seasonal Halloween event and the new Stellar Boring quest, which is a nice cute little quest, which I quite enjoyed. But the main thing here was the future of MTX leaving RuneScape 3. This was a very pivotal moment. It was actually where like the game was like, yo dude, put the, like, don't get rid of the thing, dude. Press the button. You can only vote to remove it. There is no vote no button. It's going away. Essentially, was what Jackie was saying, and it ended up getting voted. You had to get 100,000 votes for it to pass. Ended up getting 100,000 votes in like a day or something. And then it was like this weird, like, hey, every other 1,000 votes that keep coming into this, we'll make sure that we'll double down on the integrity of the game when it comes to our integrity roadmap to integrally introduce game updates. I thought that was the weirdest thing ever. And they were like, just keep voting, even though you hit the benchmark. There's no other real reason to vote. But they just kept doing it. And ended up being a little weird. So they only ended up getting 116,000 votes on it. And now in November, Leagues has now concluded, and that was the end of that. And then the announcement date for when MTX is going to be removed, which is January 19th, 2026. This is a very big, very, very, very big moment. And hopefully a lot of people was going to end up being happy about this, right? There has been a weird response to this because there's the crowd that was like, we gotta remove MTX, we've got to remove MTX and I'll play the game, has now become the crowd of, I'm not gonna play this game because MTX has ruined the integrity of everything else. There has to be fresh start servers or else I'm never gonna touch this game. That crowd who's saying that is the old school RuneScape crowd. In my very humble, dumb, employed opinion, I don't think you really need or want old school players playing this. I think what RuneScape genuinely needs is a new audience, and that can be very, very hard to get when you've already touched pretty much the entire audience. There's a really big space in MMOs of a bunch of people who've never really played RuneScape, and I think trying to cater to the old school crowd is... I think you can learn a lot from old school. I don't think you gotta cater to all of them. I think making fresh start servers would be a really bad idea because it's just going to end up dividing a player base that is already pretty small from 33,000 people. You would then split them into, like, let's say like 10,000 people go and play the fresh start servers, and they're probably just going to be fresh start alts, and they're just going to be the same exact people, and you'll probably get a bunch of content creators that try it out, make little series about it. But in my very humble opinion, the things that RuneScape needs to do before that kind of suggestion is even made is they need to fix the fundamental problems that they have in the game already. Like this beginning portion and some of the mid-game portion, they gotta refine that, and then they can maybe consider making the idea of fresh servers. That's just my idea, because that problem is still gonna persist. But they introduced the date of when the fresh start server is going to be coming into the when MTX is going to be removed from the game, which is January 19th, which a lot of people were excited about. I myself, I'm very excited about. And then as well, they changed how Lumbridge is going to end up being the new home, the new returning home of brand new players. They're going to be returning to the roots of a lot of the things they did in the game and decluttering and maintaining a significant picture of the video game. They want to provide a more cohesive idea for what RuneScape would needs to look like and maintain that same kind of art style, which I think is a really good idea because there's too many art styles across the game from a lot of different eras. I think unifying and having one unified picture of what the game should look like, because it is a very big game that has survived a lot of time, and a lot of that time has passed through many hands. So being able to have one cohesive identity in your graphic design is going to be very important for your overall cohesiveness of a video game. So I'm excited for that. And they committed to doing that, and that was a really good thing. And that, again, this is the communication bit. They're doing a really good job communicating all of these problems that that players have talked about over the years. I'm very, 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 very happy about that. And again, they continue this throughout the entire year of communicating, and I'm a huge fan of it. And then later in November, we got the Heist 120 Thieving update. This was probably one of the best updates in the game when it comes to skilling, and they actually pushed Heist Thieving all the way up to 120. It was a really good update in my opinion because it added in a bunch of brand new NPCs, a lot of new training methods, introduced a lot of new items, and introduced a very interactive and very fun and engaging way to train skilling that had a rivaled way to train your account outside and make good money in your account outside of PVM. It was a really good way to get that extra umph and like, I want to play RuneScape, I don't want to just kill things kind of mentality, and I really like that. I don't do them like religiously, but I do really enjoy doing a heist every now and then. It is fun. I genuinely really enjoy it. I want to see more of that type of update added into the game, and I'm very excited to see more of that coming in. I had a really, and honestly, if they continue to flesh out 120 skills like that, I have a lot of faith that it's going to be really good. That's a high set of pretty big high benchmark for what a 120 skill should look like, and I expect to see a lot more. They butchered it when it came to 120 Slayer. They do a really good job with 120 farming, but they haven't done a good job with some of the other 110s and 120 skills that they've increased over the years. I think that's to be a really nice way to introduce more skills and get people to do more things that are outside of combat. A lot of people want to have alternative ways to make money, and heists are a great money maker, and they're competitive and they're fun, and there's lots of ways to improve at that method and see that improvement. It's fantastic. I really like that one. And finally, in December, we got a big banger update of the Fletch Hatcher Macarnez launch, which fantastic update for brand new players who were trying to check out how do you get better at PVM? How do you get better at this thing that you click on target die? How do you make that better? And they introduced a boss that introduced a lot of very good beginner mechanics and identities so that you can learn and get better as you do other activities. It was fantastic. It's not necessarily the hardest boss fight in the game, but it is a very, very, very fundamental and core boss fight I think is needed for a lot of people. It's going to be a big challenge for anybody that's never done a boss fight in a video game before, but if you've done boss fights in other games, it'll be pretty easy to get on board with. But it's a great way to get used to how RuneScape's combat and the system works for this game. I really think they did a great job nailing that and introducing it into the game. And lastly, the big update that also came in the year was a Christmas Village. The very last Christmas Village that introduced it. But with the Christmas Village, every single year comes the big MTX push. Every single year, Christmas is probably the biggest FOMO printing item, and this year was no less. They pushed out so many MTX different promotions this year for Christmas to make sure they can milk the player base's wallet for that last little bit of crumbs. The defending argument of why they kept doing this is just, well, we already had everything in motion. We can't stop it. It's already going. Whatever. But they kept doing it anyways, even though they know that MTX is going to be leaving next year, and they kept the whole system going even past the Christmas time. It was insane. So it was a little bit of a bummer with that. But the Christmas Village thing was decent. I always enjoy a little bit of the seasonal stuff they do every year. And I was pretty happy with it. Not too bad outside of that. No Black Santa hat for me this year, but that is okay. And lastly, for the very last update of 2025 was combat improvement styles for ranged beta. Essentially where they're trying to make the ranged combat style a lot cleaner and a lot easier to get into, because it is fundamentally one of the most complicated and precise and punishing combat styles in the game, and they're trying to make it a little easier for people to get into, which is still